Now let's have a look at how to create something similar with a little bit of a different twist to it. So I'm going to take all the stuff that I've already worked on over here, and I'm going to hide that stuff. Then I'm going to go to hide by name, unhide by name, and I'm going to unhide the hanging cables example. So let's bring that guy out. So you see what we have here. Basically these sort of hanging cables. You can see how they naturally drape. So let's see how we can create something like this inside of 3ds Max. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guy here. I'm going to leave it for reference, but basically it's pretty simple. Very similar workflow to before. I'm going to create a line object here. Let me go for the initial type. I'm going to switch over to smooth. So I'm just going to come in here and start to create this sort of hanging, draping sort of flow and shape to this object. So we end up with a pretty simple curve here. And the rest is actually pretty easy. Let me go back to a perspective view, and I'm just going to quickly hide this guy. Now I have here my curve, which I'm going to use for this, and the curve is pretty simple to use. We're going to go to rendering. I'm going to enable this in the viewport. You can see right now it's way too high res, and the thickness is way too high. So I'm going to reduce the thickness by quite a bit. I'm also going to take the sides and reduce it. I don't want 6 sides. I'm actually going to go with 3 sides. That may sound a little bit weird, but here's the reasoning behind that. Since this is something that's going to be in the ceiling of the warehouse environment, this is something the player can only see when they look up from about this distance right here. Okay, so they never really get to look at it close up. So there's no reason to waste a lot of triangles right there. Also, since the player only sees this from the bottom, we're actually okay if there's only 2 polygons facing the player here and the top is flat like this. Since the player never sees the top, why would you waste polygons on that area, right? So you got to be thinking about performance optimizations at all times whenever you approach something and start working on something, as it'll save you time and headaches later. Okay, so let me take this guy here, and in terms of interpolation, it's just way too high. So we could go with 1 step here. Actually looks pretty good for a game object. We can actually increase the resolution of this afterwards if you wanted to. Could go with 2 steps. 2 steps will actually look, you know what, I'm going to go with 2 steps. That kind of already looks pretty good. Okay, so what I want to do here is, this object already looks good as is. So let me go to the top view here. I'm going to take this object. Now I don't want it to look too straight like this. See how it looks perfectly straight? That doesn't look very natural, and if the player looks at that from the bottom up, they're going to notice that, and it just looks weird. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable that from the viewport, and you could take these vertices here and kind of move them around. So I'm going to do it with the object enabled in the viewport. You can see here how I take some of this stuff and kind of just shuffle it around a little bit, just so that it looks more natural. You're going to hear me say that quite a bit. I can't stress that enough. Making objects look natural is extremely important, and one of the keys to really selling the environment to the player, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're selling the environment to the player. You're making them believe that they're actually in this game world playing this game. So I'm going to take this object here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of it, and I'm also going to rotate it. I'm going to rotate it about 180 degrees like this, and I'll place it about right here. And just to break it up a bit so it doesn't look too similar to the other one, even though it's a copy of it, I can move some of this stuff around and make it look different so that the player can't really see a pattern there, which is very important. You want to break your stuff up and not create, a pattern that the player can see too easily. So let me create another cable. I'm going to place this one over here, and I'm going to take these vertices and just kind of move them around a little bit. The cool thing about these cables is that the ends are up to you. Like, the ends are very modular. You could take the ends and connect them to a wall, to some kind of ceiling beam, a fuse box, some kind of electrical box, or something to end these cables, which is pretty cool. And if I look at this real quick, I may want to take, for example, the center curve here. I may want to change some of the proportions here a little bit. So let me go to front view, and I'll take some of these vertices, kind of just track them down over here and pull them down a little bit. So you add some variation. That's very important. Your environment should have a lot of variation. Even though you're working with the same assets over and over again, variation is key to break things up. You don't want things to look repetitive. or else your environment doesn't look as good as it could potentially look. That's what you want to do. You want an environment that looks the best that it can possibly be, as that's what's going to really suck the player into the environment, make it more believable. So fix that one up. It doesn't look perfectly straight, but it doesn't look as curved as the other one. Okay, perfect. Alright, so now with that done, it's actually pretty simple. At this point, you could actually take some of this stuff here and, for example, make some more copies like this. Go to maybe a top view up here. Rotate this around about 180 degrees. Put this closer to the other object, and now you've got yourself a nice set of cables here. It looks pretty natural, looks broken up, doesn't look exactly the same, and with a little bit more tweaking and moving some vertices, pushing and pulling them around, you can create some sets of cables that look natural. They kind of just drape down, looks like being pulled down by gravity, you know. They're still spline objects, so what you would probably want to do is take these objects and convert them to an editable poly, because that's what's going to work in engine. Okay, so convert these to editable polys so that they're actual mesh objects, as you can see, which is very important. And there you go. So there's another example of creating low polygon real-time assets for your game. I'm going to end this one here, and in the next video we're going to start to see more advanced examples of modeling real-time assets with a little bit more complexity to them.